Um,
We're live.
yeah.
Yo, we're live right now.
Oh, yo. So, just give me a second. Um, so what's going on, YouTube? Today we have a special guest that should be coming on shortly. And we're going to talk about topics that we talked about, in the past here on the channel, and we'll talk about the current events here in America and in, our parts of the world, our region, and Hispanoamerica, and in the Caribbean, and in the Anglo-Caribbean sphere. And we should have a guest coming on shortly. Just a second.
What's up, guys? How's it going?
Yeah, how you doing, Klaus?
Bien, gracias a Dios. ¿Y usted? Doing good.
It's good to hear all is well. Enjoying the weather here. Okay, here's our guest, Lipton Matthews. Greetings, how are you? My apologies for any technical difficulties or delays that
Okay,
caused.
hello, Henry. Hi.
Good evening, Mr. Matthews. How are you doing?
I'm good, and how are you doing?
Good.
We're doing well.
If I sound a bit interrupted, I'm sorry because it's the Wi-Fi here in Colombia is not very good. So, hey, Mr. Matthews.
All right, and we're live.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
We're
sir.
live right now. Where are you from, sir? Sorry.
I'm from Jamaica.
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I am from Jamaica.
Oh, okay. Good. So,
Beautiful.
how's Jamaica right now?
I love your accent, by the way, so I'm delighted to hear you speak.
Yeah, people. I was on a show with Edward Dutton, and at the end of the show, Ed said that his listeners really like the accent. Yes.
Does Jamaica particularly have a different accent amongst classes? Or
Okay, so for example, there are some in Jamaica who believe that upper class Jamaicans have a different accent. So some of their words are pronounced differently. People who are less educated across cultures will communicate in a specific tone. So yes, there are differences in language.
Understood. Yeah, so I wanted to jump in and talk about a few of your research. So Mr. Matthews is a researcher. He has contributed to the American Thinker, Mises Institute, the Jamaica Gleaner, and I've been really impressed by much of your writings and the articles that I come across. Specifically, the one that caught my attention was about Black Lives Matter and the 1619 Project that's in current events here in like the New York Times and in the media. And you come from it with a different perspective. Basically, this is a myth and it's a myopic approach to the history of slavery and the movements that we have today. So I want to hear your thoughts on and how you come about.
All right, so
yeah.
Henry, I contribute to the Federalist Mises Chronicles, Intellectual Takeout, Imaginative Conservative, and some other publications. The article you saw on Federalist was one of my earlier pieces published last year.
Correct. Yeah, that
Yes.
was one on the Federalist. My apologies. Yeah, I stand corrected. Yeah. Pull it up right here.
And where are you from, Henry?
My parents are from Dominican Republic. but I'm currently in the States right now.
Okay, okay. And are you a black Dominican or white Dominican? Just asking.
Uh, Mulatto, mostly like 60-30 and like a bit indigenous.
Okay, okay,
But
okay.
my
All
dad
right.
is more on the dark side and my mom is more on the white side because my dad is from near the border and my mom is from the mountains.
All right. So you saw my pieces on the BLM movement, and I'm guessing that you read some of the articles produced by Mises. So Henry,
Yes.
the BLM movement in America is very popular, and at the moment, support for the movement is depressing because, as we have seen, some of the characters are a bit unsavory. One person was affiliated with the St. Paul's chapter and he has repudiated BLM. BLM is based on a lie. White offenders are more likely to be killed by the police. Black policemen are also more likely to shoot unarmed black men, and they're also more likely to shoot offenders. So BLM is built on a lie. Blacks are disproportionately involved in crime. They represent 13.4% of the population, and according to recent data, they're responsible for 55.9% of murders. But that figure has been adjusted a bit. I think the present figure is near to 50. It fluctuates. So BLM, despite being predicated on a false premise, is still revered by the elite. Tech companies, scientists, leading academic journals write statements saying that they regret racism in science or economics, and they're interested in supporting BLM and solving the problem of racism. And at some point, it becomes boring because, as I said earlier, we know that BLM is based on a lie. The
Mhm.
nuclear family is good for society. BLM on one of its websites said we hope to disrupt the nuclear family and we want our women and children to be comfortable. Men were deliberately omitted and fathers are important. Fatherless children are more likely to end up in prison. They don't do as well in school. They earn less as adults. And according to a study published nearly 20 years ago by the Journal of Family Psychology, boys with fathers are more confident, and the study specifically referred to black boys. And Raj Shetty in his report noted that black boys who were raised by their fathers also do better relative to other black boys. So BLM is harmful and it will not aid in the development of black Americans or the broader American society.
Well said, well put. I agree. And what's interesting about it here in the United States, especially in our cities, is that we're seeing um, the leaders of the BLM or like the black elites. They're a lot of well, black undergraduate students in our universities are from either West Africa, like Nigeria, or
In
from the
Nigeria,
Caribbean, the Igbo tribe specifically.
yes, I've written on the Igbo people of Nigeria.
Yeah, and their successes and contributions in capitalism. The, they seem to be either, I don't know if it's similar or getting involved in these tribes where the black elite of like the 60s and 70s, I think we've talked about this, they would write a check to the NAACP and not get involved in this activism. And what we're seeing today is that, the activists are these spiteful mutants, these crazy women
Yes,
that want
yes.
to
So
destroy the the nuclear
they no,
family.
remember, BLM emerged out of the context of racism leveled at black people by the police. However, the movement is also interested in the transgender movement, lesbianity, transracialism, and all sorts of nonsense. So some would refer to it as cultural Marxism, although I think that's an inappropriate term because the Marxists are interested in the political economy and class relations, and BLM is an identitarian movement, and Marxists are usually uninterested in identity politics. They care more about class and globalization, these big picture issues. So BLM is not Marxist. It's really a group of black elites who are aided and abetted by white people who dislike Western civilization. So the plight of ordinary blacks is being used to enrich middle class black women. It is not about black lives. A black person, according to Heather McDonald in one video, is 300 times more likely to be killed by another black person than by the police. Blacks are disproportionately the victims of crime, and they're also disproportionately the offenders.
Isn't that a bit racist to say? Not that that's not what I believe, but that's what other people would believe.
Well,
You know what I'm saying?
sir, I'm guided by the data, and I don't listen to idiots. I'm going to try to be polite and pretend like I have fact, but I don't. If you're an
Based.
idiot, I'm going to say that you're an idiot. Yeah,
Well
I'm
said.
driven by
I
the
like that.
data.
Well done. Um, and I'm curious, has any of these protesters or have segued into Jamaica by chance,
Yes,
or
because Jamaicans, Henry, Jamaicans, like most people today, are driven by emotionalism and sentiment. So there was actually a BLM protest in Jamaica, but it's interesting. For years, Amnesty International criticized the government of Jamaica for failing to stem extrajudicial killings. So extrajudicial killings represent a problem in Jamaica. Yet Jamaicans went to demonstrate against Black Lives Matter, despite the fact that it is predicated on a lie. And point number two is that the so-called saints of the movement are criminals. George
right?
Floyd had a criminal record. The other young man, Michael Brown, according to the U.S. government, his killing was justified. These are not saints, and there was and I will also tell you that I have excellent memory, but when I read these stories, sometimes I forget the names of the victims, and I'm not going to lie. So I'm sure you remember the victim who fought the police, disarmed him of his weapon, and the policeman killed him.
Yeah.
He was also a troubled personality. And then there was the other young guy who was at a party. The police showed up, and there was a warrant for his arrest, and he was also attacked. I mean, he ended up in the hospital. Maybe his name was Jacob. I think it's
Hmm.
that case, but I won't pretend to remember all of their names.
So this is very interesting because I want to understand if there's a parallel with what's going on in Jamaica and here in the United States. Perhaps in your universities, they're telling you that Jamaica is a victim to the British Empire.
Well, so that's a very famous statement. Universities in Jamaica are not highly intellectual. In the 60s, Jamaica had many prominent academics, mostly on the left, but despite being leftists, they were pretty smart people like Norman Gervan, etc.
Hmm.
But today, our universities are not overly intellectual. But after I graduated from a Jamaican university, I went there once and I saw signs relating to the LGBT movement. So I guess students are being indoctrinated. No, but back to your question, read the British Empire. On average, British colonies are more democratic. They have higher per capita incomes and better academic outcomes. And Darren Aslimugul and James Robinson, who nearly 20 years ago produced a paper that's brilliant, but some of their arguments are exaggerated. They contend that some colonies, because of colonialism, became relatively poorer. and I'm going to focus on the word relative. So yes, the Americas in the when you compare countries in Latin and Central America to America, that region became relatively poor. But objectively, today they're richer than they were in 1500. So I think people should stress the concept of relativity more. And secondly, the Aztecs and the Inca were extractive empires. Portugal and Spain were the original extractive empires in Europe, and today they are laggards. So colonialism does not explain the rise of Europe. Even when we look at Belgium, Sir Denis Brogan some years ago wrote that the government of Belgium did not benefit much from their colonies in Africa. Countries in Europe could pursue colonialism because Europe was already rich. When you look at interest rates as a proxy for institutional efficiency in the medieval ages, Europe had better institutions. Europe, in particular, England had a sophisticated system of apprenticeship. China had a similar system, but the Chinese system did not transcend tribal identities. So, because the British system was able to transcend the tribe, it was more effective. People cooperated and collaborated with strangers and became more innovative. So, Europe, for some time now, has been propelling forward. And
Right.
and let me also continue. The relationship between colonial possessions and economic growth is negative. Sweden was an imperial power. It had colonies in Europe and they were expensive. Then Russia was also an imperial power. Russia had colonies in Europe, and today Russia, compared to the West, is a laggard. Sweden became rich because of institutions, work ethic, and social capital, and the free market, not socialism or colonialism. Colonialism is expensive.
So that's very interesting because I would I would say that the countries of the Spanish Empire that became republicans seem to most of them seem to be doing a lot more they're more economically stable than those that were a part of the Anglosphere.
No,
If
well, Henry, when you look at the empirical data and read the studies, they will tell you that the younger colonies, the younger countries that were colonized by America, they have done well. British colonies have also done well, and the Dutch did not do badly, but on average, Spanish colonies don't do as well.
well,
Yeah,
in relation to the New World, like the Anglo Caribbean, I mean the Australia, New Zealand, and the
yeah, those
United
are the
States
British
are
settler colonies.
yes,
Those colonies were not abundant in resources, so their environment selected for institutions to promote trade, investment, and innovations because they weren't resource rich like countries in the Americas. So the system in the Americas created exploitation and extractive institutions to ensure that slaves and workers were overworked to create wealth for the elite.
got it.
So,
And is one would see I know for instance I've been to Haiti countless times and I've never been to Jamaica, but it's quite obvious from data and people that visited firsthand that Jamaica is doing substantially better than Haiti.
Jamaica
Um,
has done better. Well, continue. You can continue.
yes, um, but then wait, maybe you can say the Barbados or Bahamas. How do they compare with Jamaica? They're pretty much on
Barbados
similar.
Barbados and Bahamas are richer countries, more peaceful countries, and they have a lower crime rate. Jamaica, compared to Haiti, is a paradise, but Jamaica has not done well. when you check the reports of the World Bank, it's evident that for years Jamaica recorded anemic economic growth. So Jamaica has not done well. It's one of the disappointments of the post-independent world.
Why is
Right.
that?
Okay, so even libertarians are now writing on the issue of state capacity. Many studies done by historians and economists have shown that there's a correlation between pre-colonial institutions for the colonized world and for the non-colonized world, older institutions. So there's a relationship between state centralization and development. Jamaica in 1962 inherited a growing economy and strong state capacity. The parliament was productive. So there's a writer, Aaron Graham. He has done significant research on the legislative history of Jamaica. The British in Jamaica built institutions. We had a working parliament. There was the Victoria Institute. The Victoria Institute no longer exists. On the eve of independence, the economy was growing, but income inequality was a problem. Social inequality was also another problem. There was a gap in the ability of the poor to access education when compared to the rich. But we went downhill because of policies instituted in the 1970s. From 1972 to 1980, the economy contracted
So
by
from
25.
Norman Manley.
Michael. The father was
Oh,
also
Michael.
on the left. So Norman Manley was on the left, but he was a Fabian socialist, a reform socialist. He had no time to get up and say, I am with the developing world. We're socialists. Americans can go to hell. This is the difference between the father and the son. They were both on the left, but the son irritated the United States. And I'm a realist. If you get entangled in global politics at the expense of the states, you will be destroyed. So Manley and his antics did not serve Jamaica well, and the economy contracted by 25%. The elites fled the country because he said if you didn't like what I was doing, you could always go to Miami. They fled the country. His policies were expansionary when he should have focused on being fiscally conservative. So in
Yeah.
19
One of the interesting things about Jamaica's independence, I've seen this interview recently with Lee Kuan Yew, and he
yes,
goes down to Jamaica, and they both have roughly about the same GDP at the
yeah,
time.
Jamaica.
And Jamaica intends to grow the economy on tourism, and Q found that ridiculous and went with
It
human
is.
capital. Human capital, right?
So okay, so Lee Kuan Yew went to several countries. Lee Kuan Yew was influenced by the Japanese. He liked the Japanese system of productivity, how they train their workers. He liked Israel. Lee Kuan Yew went to America and England, and when Lee Kuan Yew went to England, you recognize that British academics were focused on studying the past, but American academics, even those in the social studies, wanted to understand the future. So he was influenced by the American school, particularly Professor Raymond
Hello.
Porter.
Yeah, we hear
Hello?
you, close.
Yeah. He was influenced by a famous American professor. I believe his name is Raymond Porter. Yes, So Lee Kuan Yew was quite adept at benchmarking. When he went to Jamaica and he listened to Manley, he laughed because he said that Manley's policies were impractical. Jamaica is located strategically in in the Caribbean. Jamaica had enough educated people. We have been sending students to Oxford and Cambridge for years, even during the era of slavery. So Lee Kuan Yew found it rather odd that Manley had such a backward perspective. But Lee Kuan Yew invested in primary education, secondary education, and technical education because as a developing country, you need to ensure that your people have access to the right jobs. I am an advocate of science and technology, but when most people are not overly educated, it makes sense to train them to work in factories or to become manufacturers, and then over a period of time, the economy will mature and you can train more scientists and engineers. So the policy of Lee Kuan Yew was more strategic. Jamaica got a loan from the World Bank to construct schools in the 60s, and the program failed. It morphed into a corrupt endeavor, and low quality schools were built, whereas the Singaporeans had a consistent policy. So a non-Jamaican writer, Welsh, he actually has a paper comparing the academic policies of Jamaica to Singapore. But Jamaica's failed in many areas. So, and again,
Understood.
people praise
And
Manly for its policy of free tuition in the 70s, but that policy benefited middle class people who, under normal circumstances, may have studied at university anyway. Whereas Lee Kuan Yew invested in technical institutes and polytechnics to ensure that his workers had the requisite skills.
he also had a cutting edge immigration policy with Indians and Chinese from India, Hong Kongers, and how much income they'd have to earn to get the visas to live in Singapore. And this is despite Singapore having a historically low fertility rate and
Yeah, his name is Raymond Vernon. The professor who influenced Lee Kuan Yew, his name is Raymond Vernon. That's very important. But Lee Kuan Yew even told his men to marry smart women because we can inherit IQ. Some accused him of being a dictator, but again, studies do show that countries like South Korea and Singapore improved because they appointed men like Lee Kuan Yew to lead, who were committed to free markets and development, and also human capital.
Based.
Yeah, developing countries are impacted by charismatic authority. Remember, there's a persistent relationship between IQ and development. So if you're leading people who are not particularly educated, it makes sense to appoint a strong man with a brain like Lee Kuan Yew.
Right, and you see this in the Caribbean region with the disparities. For example, Haiti and Dominican Republic, where one side of the island has been more successful than the other, and I think the IQ capacity plays a big component. So perhaps
Haiti was given a raw deal, but it's also the beneficiary of corrupt leaders. We cannot discount that fact. Yes,
Papa Doc,
Papa Doc, and several other leaders. I was taught by a professor who's a specialist in Asian history, and during class, it was so funny that Haiti, after appointing one leader, that leader was deposed and he would flee to Jamaica in exile. So Haiti has a long history of appointing corrupt men to lead, and then the class and race dynamics in Haiti are complicated. Mulattoes and blacks are not necessarily friends, and for a long time there was a deep conflict between mulattoes and blacks.
Correct.
So Haiti was given a raw deal by the French, and corruption compounded the problem.
And what's interesting about that is that if like countries like Bahama or they have a more friendly or more, they get along more famously, like the whites and blacks and the Anglo-Caribbean or the Dutch Caribbean countries.
Because Barbados is an interesting case. During slavery in Barbados, the black free men were respected as professionals, and black slaves were even noted for their skills. The Bayesian system was quite strategic. It was a brutal system, however, planters often rewarded slaves who complied with their rules, and Barbados is constrained by geography. Therefore, where can slaves go to? Nowhere. It's very difficult for them to escape. It's not like Jamaica, that's mountainous, Jamaica had the Maroons.
The
So
Maroons, yes.
Bajan slaves were forced to become more rational. It's not that they weren't revolutionary, but revolution did not make sense in the Bajan context. It made more sense to be friends with whites in order to get ahead. So Barbados appropriated British culture. Barbados inherited procedural knowledge. Jamaicans have declarative knowledge. Orlando Patterson produced a brilliant piece on Barbados, and it's unfortunate that more people don't read it. And he argues that the Bajan state had managerial capacity because even in the colonial era, blacks were in the police force. Bajan whites had immense confidence in the black middle class. It was different in Jamaica. So, because of access to institutional learning, the Bajans knew how to develop a state, whereas Jamaicans had declarative knowledge. They they had, they knew the theory, but they didn't understand the know-how.
And
Yeah.
uh,
So,
I did want to ask because the Bajans got a low, if not any. I know Trinidad and Jamaica got a immigration like the Indians,
yeah,
from India that.
Trinidad, Jamaica, and Guyana. Jamaica got Chinese and Indian. Trinidad had a large Indian population.
What's the when it comes to the social fabric of those countries? 'Cause I know in Jamaica
Well,
the
okay, so in politics in in Guyana and Trinidad is divided by race. In Jamaica, it's by tribalism. So Jamaica has two parties, the JLP and the PNP, and I did not say class or race. I said tribalism. So people will compete because of the party they support. But Guyana and Trinidad had serious racial issues in the past. There are still complications, but the issues are not as troublesome as they were 20 to 30 years ago. But the
and very
Chinese,
recently with the presidential election recently, if
yeah,
I'm not
but
What
mistaken.
what are those
the
tensions?
Chinese,
I'm not aware of those tensions. Could you please explain? Like,
oh, so for example, so in Guyana had Forbes, Burnham, and Chedi Dan. Forbes was black, Chedi was an Indian. So in Guyana and Trinidad, people are divided along racial lines. So some parties represent the interests of Indians, other parties represent the interests of blacks, and it can get bloody. But that I, I'm not living in Guyana and Trinidad. Every now and then I will pay attention to those countries, but these in the Caribbean is not very tense anymore. We had greater tensions in the past, but not so much again. But in the past, racial tensions were mild.
Understood. Got it. Got it. Um, where, where was I before I
Yeah.
lost my train of thought? Here's my just a second. But no, I'm really fascinated in the Anglo Caribbean experience and uh, why certain islands are economically in different positions. Do, do you have any thoughts on the Dutch ones like Curacao and
The
Aruba?
Dutch, the, the, the Dutch islands in the Caribbean. Suriname is the exception. Suriname had a dictator, but for the most part, Dutch islands in the Caribbean are able to maximize tourism. So tourism is a major income earner in Dutch islands in the Caribbean, and they seem to do very well in the arena of politics. They're more liberal and more open to minorities. But the interesting countries in Caribbean are really Trinidad, Jamaica, Barbados, Guyana, etc. And the
Got
Cayman
it.
Islands has done very well. It's a
For
it's a financial
tax
haven.
haven.
Yes.
Yeah, and Turks and Caicos too, if I'm not mistaken.
and the overseas departments of France, Martinique, Guadeloupe, etc.
Yeah,
But
and
islands, being small is often an advantage. Small countries lack sizable internal markets, so as a result, they must penetrate the globe. And on average, small countries have better institutions and they're less corrupt. So the Caribbean region is relatively small. So Antigua, based on per capita income, is not doing badly. Bahamas is doing very well. They're small countries, and small countries means small problem. There's actually a study with that title: "Small Countries, Small Problems."
very well.
And then
This is
again, they're easier to manage because they're not very diverse.
yeah, they're very homogenous, and yeah.
Yes.
This is very interesting because this leads me to a topic that Klaus and I have talked about, and this is monarchies, and for reasons of economic growth. And Klaus and I would argue that Puerto Rico or Dominican Republic would be better off under the old Spanish monarchy. Now, considering where Spain is in today with its liberalism and its social issues, and it's it's fragmented. It's not
Well,
best, but what you wrote an article a few months ago.
our monarchy is
Monarchy
better for
is
economic
better for
growth.
economic growth. Yeah, I mean, can you tell us a bit about that? And Hans Hermann Hoppe is one of my favorite economists, and he has significantly influenced me.
Mo- mo- Managing country is serious business, and and management ensures that leaders influence disparate groups. The monarchy is a symbol of national unity. So kings and queens are adept at building social capital. So during periods of reforms, monarchs are useful because the monarch represents continuity. So studies have shown that when countries are embarking on reforms, having a monarch is a plus. Secondly, the monarchy is private government, as Up would say. And as a monarch, you're interested in your wealth and the long term stability of the country. Because if you are a successful monarch, people are more likely to support the institution of monarchy. So monarchies are actually more likely to protect private property rights. And up positive theoretical argument, but empirical studies have shown that hereditary rule is correlated with development, and in fact, monarchs are motivated to invest in private property and they're less likely to expropriate resources. So it's not just a theoretical model. Secondly, are monarchies less likely to go to war? I don't know if you're familiar with Eric von Leden. This was his argument, but a study was done showing that when monarchies are compared to small republics, monarchies are less likely to go to war. And it's obvious. Remember, during the medieval ages, the nobility and kings relied on mercenaries to fight wars. A war was a private business. Nationalism was popularized by the French Revolution and the future revolutions of the 19th century. But for much of history, warfare was a private endeavor. So a monarch would rely on a private force to fight war. And wars are expensive, so a smart monarch would promote peace. So the theoretical argument and assumptions of Hoppe have been confirmed by data. And again, people are emotional characters, and a monarch represents national stability. So monarchy is not a corrupt form of government. It's actually quite useful. And in a time of crisis like now, maybe some countries do need a king.
I
Yeah.
agree. Are you do you believe in like divine monarchy? Are you religious? If you don't mind my asking.
Yeah, I am a religious person, but I don't believe in divine monarchy because Christianity, properly understood, is a liberal religion, not a libertarian religion, but it's a liberal religion. What do we teach? We teach that God is the ultimate king, and the earthly king is a subject of the law. He's not above the law. So when you check Christian history and you read about people like Ambrose, it becomes obvious that Christian bishops were not afraid to impose the law on kings. So I
All
don't
right.
believe in the concept of a divine monarchy. The king is subject to the law. He's not above the law. God is divine, but man is not divine. We're all equal. Equal in the sense that the law should not discriminate against us based on our status, but we're not equal in terms of talent. Some people are very entrepreneurial, some are beautiful, and others are very bright.
Understood. Very, very well said. And Jamaica is historically like a Anglican or
Jamaica is evangelical. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is extremely popular. It's the largest individual denomination in Jamaica. But Jamaicans are evangelical, Pentecostals, the New Testament Church. Traditional churches are no longer doing well in Jamaica. It's an evangelical country with a influential
what?
Seventh-day Adventist lobby.
I'm curious about that. Is it something that like maybe the elites were a part of the traditional
Yeah, the
Ang-
elites in Jamaica today are
and,
still Anglicans, but
and when they
we have a
fled,
small elite.
the church fled,
Yes?
and when they fled, did the church flee with them as well?
The Anglican Church was disestablished after the Morant Bay Rebellion. It was the state-supported church, but then after the Morant Bay Rebellion, it was established. But let me explain a simple point. Evangelical churches are doing better than established churches because people go to church to get a doctrine. Christianity is a doctrine. It's not just a way of life. So evangelical pastors stress the Bible and theology. Up the elite churches like the Anglicans tend to water down theology a bit to suit popular or the popular audience, but most people go to church to be edified. In other words, if you're a pastor teaching that fornication or same-sex marriage is okay, people are likely to leave the church.
Right.
So yes, so but yeah, this is a fact. This is what sociologists have shown. People are not leaving the church because of science, but due to theological issues. And evangelical churches are growing in Latin America and Africa because of their strong content and emphasis on the Bible.
Yeah,
When
that's why
churches
I was.
when churches adopt positions that are unbiblical but politically popular, people tend to deviate from the denomination.
Right. I was noticed like then in Central America and in Brazil, they've elected evangelical presidents who are more conservative than the traditional Catholics of those countries. And it's an interesting phenomenon. I myself was raised Anglican, and I'm reverting into Catholicism because now the Anglican or the Episcopalian Church, we call it here, is perhaps one of the most liberal churches, and its
So, for example,
doctrine is
there,
ever changing.
yes, people like strong doctrines and consistency. So, for example, there are pastors in Europe who don't believe in God. So,
Correct.
and most people view Europe as secular, but for a long time, the church in Sweden was supported by the state. Europe actually had state-sponsored churches, even though we view Europe as secular. So the idea of imposing a tax on the church is quite silly. The church is the mediating layer between the state and civil society. Paying offering is a form of worship. You can't tax the church. That's a violation of religious freedom and something we hold to be sacrosanct. But
Well
when
said.
pastors take their faith seriously, their congregations will grow.
Nice. Yeah, I do agree with that. Very well. Klaus, do you have any thing to say or add, or if you're there, can you hear us?
Klaus looks like he's muted.
Oh, okay, I just saw that. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so, just give me a
But
second. Go ahead.
yeah, so Henry, you also have an interest in the 1619 project,
Yeah, I
which was condemned by leading historians. And Nicole Hannah Jones actually had to recant some of her ideas. Nonetheless, we're still forced to take her seriously. So for example, it's becoming popular to note that slavery made America rich. The new economic history of capitalism. Yes, slavery did provide capital, but it also deprived America of the ingenuity of black people. Black slaves were not allowed to patent, neither could their owners implement their patents, and secondly, slavery misallocated labor. So for example, a black who could read or do mathematics well worked as a slave. As such, the society was deprived of its labor and ingenuity. It was expensive for America. There's not a big debate. It delayed industrialization, and when men were encouraged to track down runaway slaves, they could have been doing something more productive.
it could be said there was a brain drain, basically.
Yeah, without slavery,
Yeah,
America would be richer.
got it. Yeah, and in comparison, would you say that the experience of slavery in the American South in the American South was different in other parts of the of the New World?
Okay, slavery in the West generally was different. When compared to working class people in the American South, slaves did well materially, and the results are also similar for Caribbean countries. You can read people like J.R. Ward and John Clegg has a study, and he cites some of these writers. So slavery generally in the Western world was different, and what's also interesting about the West is that the effects of slavery do not linger, in the sense that Black Americans who are descendants of slaves can marry to white Americans or Chinese Americans. In Nigeria, for example, the descendants of the Usu caste are treated poorly in Igbo land. So the Usu was a slave. He was dedicated to the deities. So his form of slavery was actually worse than the Ohu. And today in Nigeria, their descendants are still seen as less than human. In the regions that comprise the Sokoto Caliphate, descendants of slaves are also treated differently. This is not so in America. So the effects of slavery linger more egregiously elsewhere.
Got it.
But don't that owners in the West divest themselves from slave-based. There's a new book out on the topic written by Bronwell, or maybe it's Bronwell. It sounds German, but I'm just going to call it how it looks. Everett Woman. And it comes the tale of British entrepreneurs who divested themselves from slave labor because it was unethical. A movement to abolish slavery first occurred in the West, and then it was transported elsewhere. Ethiopia is an exception. Well, again, Ethiopia is not a great exception because Ethiopia is Christian, and the first systematic treatment of slavery was done by Christians. But Ethiopia tried for a while to abolish slavery under a Christian monarch, and the West is predominantly Christian. Christianity emerged in the East and became very influential in North Africa before its dominance in the West, but the West appropriated Christianity. So St. Augustine was from North Africa, but it's more popular today in the West than in Nigeria or Liberia.
Right. Right. Very well. Yeah. Um, no. Well. Yeah. The slavery is an interesting topic because we're told
It
that
is.
the South is lagging behind because perhaps I would agree that Reconstruction was short.
No, the South has been lagging behind for a long time. Remember, slavery did not allocate resources to science or manufacturing. Slavery kept the South in the export vortex, so I call it the export trap. So I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of the middle income trap or the export trap. So a small country exports potatoes or mangoes, and it begins to do well, but it gets
Right.
trapped in exports, and it does not move beyond exports to invest in services or ICT. So slavery trapped the slaves. No, sorry, slavery trapped the South in that condition, and it also prevented innovation to a great degree. Innovation could occur during slavery, but it was more instrumental than transformative. Slave owners could not accommodate transformative innovations. Why? It's obvious. Slave owners had legislators and they had power to lobby for privileges. And if they supported innovation, then it became clear that they no longer needed slavery. If you don't have slavery, slave owner is not as influential anymore. So the political
Right.
economy of slavery is very important. Export. Slave economy is not like a normal economy. So John Brown plantation is not competing with Mary Jane plantation. They may intend to to, let's say, Argentina or Guyana, but there's little in terms of product differentiation. So John Brown's not saying I need to get 25% of the market and I need to ensure that my product is superior to the product of Mary Jane. So on that level, slavery did not encourage innovation. It was the export trap, a perfect example.
Very well. Yeah, that's a example, especially when it came to the economics of it. And also, I think also a lot of people do forget that there were non-white slave owners,
Of course, yes, like
Americans, and
William Ellison. So
yeah,
Calvin Wilson, he was a doyen in the field. He had a book on the topic, and Carter G. Woodson, who founded Black History Month, also wrote on the issue. Carter G. Woodson was black. Black people owned slaves. They owned their relatives, and not all black slave owners were willing to free blacks or even their relatives. Many of them owned slaves for profit. It was a
right,
business, and some were very cruel.
yeah, yeah. And we don't discuss that here enough in our history curriculum.
I
We
have a piece
completely
on the
ignore
topic
that.
I have a piece on the topic for Mises.
Yeah, I think I came across it if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, brief history of non-white slave owners in
Yes, yes,
America.
yes.
Yes.
You can.
Yeah.
I would love for you to read a section of it. The maybe the Calvin Wilson section or the section stating that blacks owned other blacks for profit. Just read an excerpt for our readers.
Um, the excerpt is. Are you able to pull it up by chance? An excerpt?
Okay, it's just I can, yeah. Just hold on.
Yeah, my apologies. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, let me read this. So, Larry Coder's groundbreaking text, Black Slave Owners, Free Black Masters in South Carolina, 1790 to 1860, dispute the dominant narrative propagated by disciples of Woodson, Carter G. Woodson. When Carter G. Woodson asserted that free blacks purchased slave relatives and friends, he was quite correct. However, free blacks who held loved ones bought other slaves to be exploited for profit. To classify these transactions as benevolent would be a mistake. Even though these slave owners usually demonstrated benevolent behavior towards their slave relations and friends, a commercial and materialistic exchange existed between them and their slaves purchased as investments. In fact, the free blacks who maintained a dual relationship with their slaves had no universal commitment against slavery. To them, slavery was an oppressive institution when it affected a beloved relative or a trusted friend. But beyond that realm, slavery was viewed as a profit making institution to be exploited. Yes,
Right. And
that's the
you,
truth.
yes, and it just the next paragraph. Other scholars implore us not to be shocked that blacks in America expressed an interest in owning slaves, as summarized by Calvin Wilson. Quote: The Negroes brought with them from their native lands African ideas and customs.
Yes,
Many of those brought hence to be hence the America has been slaves in their own lands. Others have been owners of slaves in Africa. In both cases, they were used. In both cases, they were used to slavery.
yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
it summarizes.
slavery was a permanent, was a long-standing institution in the Asante and Dahomey empires of of Africa, and furthermore, blacks in the Caribbean and mulattoes who owned slaves didn't want it to be abolished, and when it was abolished, they demanded compensation. So reparations is becoming popular, but black owners said we wanted our money, and they got it.
Yeah, and it's becoming popular here, especially the state of California are looking to
Yes.
set up a commission to explore it, and California wasn't a slave state.
But let's be
Uh,
realistic, Henry. Less than 25% of blacks of whites in the South own slaves, and in the North, s- slave ownership among whites didn't go above 5%.
right.
Only a small percentage of whites own slaves, and black Americans, like other blacks in the diaspora, are better off. The per capita income in America is higher than that of Nigeria and Ghana. The literacy rate is higher, and so is the life expectancy. So slavery is a negative event with a positive consequence. And lastly, most of us who are black in the diaspora are not interested in the ancestral religions of Africa. So there's an argument that black people lost culture because of slavery. No, that doesn't make sense. Culture is dynamic, it's always changing, and people are individuals. So maybe one person would prefer ancestral religions. I don't care for them, and maybe you do not. So in that sense, most of us have not lost anything culturally because our ancestors were enslaved.
Correct. Yeah, like Santeria being
Yeah,
a
exactly.
popular
And
one.
Obian fetish religions, Mingi, or killing albinos. Mingi,
Yeah,
that's a child with a defect. So in some parts of
yeah,
Africa,
yeah. I've seen
people
those
like
videos.
as
It's
witches, and they're killed. Mingi. We haven't lost much culturally by living in the West.
so
Even
in go ahead.
so, for example, the RNC, a British company in Nigeria, opposed human sacrifice. The British abolished sati in India. When that this means that a woman would immolate herself after the death of her husband. The British also abolished slavery in India
Mhm.
and forced and built schools. Missionaries built schools throughout the developing world.
Yeah,
Protestants.
the Protestants, the Raj, right? Raj.
We are mostly Protestants. But you are
Mostly
making a point, so you can go ahead now.
Um, no, I was saying, Alex, we're reaching the 1 hour mark, and we're having a very fruitful conversation. But for any closing or just wrapping up, closing
Yeah,
thoughts, we please.
we have 7 minutes left, so we can speak briefly on the West. I
Yeah,
must say that it's a pleasure to be a Western citizen. The closer you are to the West, the richer the country, the longer the duration of colonial rule in some former colonies, the better the bureaucracy. On average, Western rule has been a plus. So, for example, people decry colonialism, but prior to colonialism, Indians and Africans were already living under imperial empires. What was the Mughal Empire? It was like any other empire that exploited people. It did good and it did bad. So
right.
I don't think we should be emotional about colonialism. That's a part of development and the quest for power. It's human nature. Humans like to conquer other people. Most states have been extractive and imperialistic. Very
I'm curious. Are you uh, generally positive or negative on China and their influence that they're having now? Because now it seems like China is the quote unquote neo-colonialist power that
okay. So
is making
China,
way.
according to CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, China is still trailing America in terms of technology and output. The Chinese want to play a spoiler role in US politics like the Russians. China views herself as a counterbalance to US hegemony. China is not really interested in ruling the world. The Chinese want to make money. And we should never forget that China is a rule by law nation, not a rule of law nation. It's the principle of legalism. The word of the state is like the word of God. So China will not become a democracy. Free markets won't make China democratic. It may create a middle class, but it will not change the culture. And because the Chinese have done well under
Right.
a
That was the U.S.'s impression. I
yes,
think George Bush was like, the freer the market, the freer the people, and
no.
eventually China. And
Remember,
that's not the case.
no,
That's not the
remember,
case today.
remember, China is an Asian civilization, so it's harder to change the culture of China. It can take decades or even centuries to change culture. Culture is not fixed like genes, but it's hard to change culture. And the Chinese people have done well under dictatorship. As we, as critics often say, a Chinese dictatorship will not result in a George W. Bush. So when you compare America and other Western countries electing leaders like Trump and Bush, the Chinese have an obvious advantage because their system is more meritocratic. Their leaders are highly educated. They're trained before ascending higher offices. So, based on the dynamics of politics in China and management, the Chinese system cannot select for a Sarah Palin or another comedic figure.
Of
So,
course.
Xi Jinping may be to our left, but he knows what he's doing. The Chinese and the Russians are weaponizing identity politics. They know that America is not in a space or may not be in the space in the next 20 or 30 years to fight them on a geopolitical level. Because when you're going to say that the military ought to be diverse, obviously you're not interested in maintaining hegemony. I believe in diversity in terms of skills and intelligence, but not on the basis of race or sexual orientation.
Right.
Yeah,
Where for
yeah. So the Russian
and
and
I was going to say, with here in the educational in the collegiate level, there's affirmative action, and the Chinese are not concerned with that. As a matter of fact, a lot of their students come here and get educated and go back and
Yes,
uh,
yes.
and play a part in intellectual property stealing.
And again, it's when, so for example, Cambridge, I looked at on a list of scholarships, and many of the students were from China, and they were studying engineering or mathematics. So the Chinese are strategic, where students study serious topics and they go back to China to make China a greater power. And even when they do philosophy, they're studying Adam Smith and Karl Marx. The Chinese don't care about sexual orientation or transgender people or any of that nonsense. And it's really sad to watch the slow and amusing decline of America. It's not. It shouldn't be amusing, but it's funny to me that people could be so dedicated to kicking themselves in the ass. Yeah, it really baffles the mind, because here you have a country, Americana, a somewhat great country, who is just prostrating before dubious characters and terrorists, because BLM is like a terrorist movement.
Right, and
And the idiocy doesn't seem to be ending anytime soon.
that's exactly right. It's really amazing, and it's just disappointing that it's they're being given, it's like more fuel to the fire, where BLM is actually just now, they have a seat at like the DNC, the Democratic Party, and Biden, despite his dementia, does listen to
but
them
you
from time
no
to time.
but
Or yeah,
Henry, well, we're going to end soon, like an hour now. But Biden has experience, but for a long time, people just laughed at him. There are videos of Biden terrorizing reporters and just shouting. And today, he's seen as a serious man.
yeah,
The intellect of Biden was never taken seriously.
no, not at all. He wasn't the brightest in law school, and uh, he wasn't a laborious senator. I mean,
Yeah.
despite the seniority and being there in years, I mean, it wasn't
And
like he
then
was
he's
very.
appointing people to senior positions who are not qualified. Like there's some
Uh,
woman at Department of Justice who was a student, was expressed very racist views in relation to white people. And
oh
then one of
yeah,
his
I recall.
and one of his major figures in the scientific world is not a physicist, but this is another time, another place. But it was a pleasure
I want to
speaking to
ask
you.
really quick. I want to ask really quick. Did Jamaica celebrate Kamala Harris's accomplishments as vice president here?
Well, okay. So Kamala's accomplishment is an individual accomplishment. She was born in America. She's not a Jamaican, but Jamaicans are sentimental people. So because she's the VP, they see it as their accomplishment. But I don't buy into that crap. Neither do I
I,
care for
I was just
Kamala.
I was just kidding because many communities operate as a collective, and her accomplishment is my accomplishment. That's what I've been told.
No, it's not. But and then
I
remember,
agree. No, I agree with your sentiment, but I was just asking.
I don't engage in other hominems, but Kamala is a woman. Had she been a man, we'd be hearing more about her previous life and relationships. That's all I will say.
Well said. I agree. You, it's been an honor talking to you, Lipton Matthews. I really appreciate you for making the time to come on. If you can plug in your website where we can find you, and your closing statement.
Also, you can find me at Mine's American Thinker or YouTube. I'm on YouTube, so my name is Lipton Matthews. If you type in my name, you'll see a photo of Adam Smith. That's my channel, and Matthews Lipton at Twitter, and or my PayPal account, the voice of the right at gmail.com, no space. If you're interested in supporting my work, you can always send a contribution.
Sounds good.
Yeah,
Well,
that's it.
thank you again, and have a great night.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Hello.
Plus, we were waiting for you to end the stream. Since
Oh, my
we
bad.
finished the answer. Did you fall asleep or something?
All right. No.
Yeah.
I was just focused on someone. All right. I'm in the stream right now.